Angus Taylor, the Energy Minister, was out there today and he had this to say.
The priority in Victoria has to be avoiding premature closure of their existing generators. Now, backing up the huge amount of investment that they want to pursue, $19 billion worth of investment in intermittent sources of energy, is going to be a major challenge for the Victorian government, and that will need gas and hydro at the very least.
All right, David Gazard, you know, people went to a ballot in May and they said they didn't want a 50% renewable energy target. Scott Morrison won the unwinnable election on the very basis of that issue. But in Victoria, they're just going ahead with it anyway, and it's going to cost consumers in that state 19 odd billion, 18.7 over 10 years, $8,000 per household when Victoria used to have cheap energy. Certainly hasn't for the last few years.
It sort of shows the tectonic plates of, you know, the support for greater penetration of renewables, but a support for lower energy prices. So you've had that colliding over some time, and the state has just kept progressing down the path of injecting more renewables, which just aren't as reliable. So you've got to the end of days now for Hazelwood and Loy Yang. Both have been huge contributors to the state. They've been able to rely on the interconnector to Tasmania, which has got hydropower. But the warnings are there that if you have a particularly hot summer, there's going to be Victorian and South Australian consumers that could be without power this time round. So you almost wonder at how we've got to this point. We have actively participated in destabilising the grid, which is going to potentially have massive ramifications, all to get a lower carbon footprint, which is being added every day by other participants in the world, particularly China, that is replacing all of Australia's energy output every 9 months. So it's a sort of a tokenistic effort to do the right thing, but it's going to have potential catastrophic ramifications for consumers and business.
Prue, I mean, when people talk about support for renewables, as David just did, he's right, but I think the support for renewables in the latest polling that I had seen, and certainly this mirrors what I understood well in government, people support panels on their roof because it brings down the cost of their power bill. They're not up for renewables per se, and they're certainly not up for renewables if they appreciate the extra cost there and the unreliability into the system. As I said before, we've seen in elections 2013 and just again recently, people are voting away from wholesale increases in power prices, and also the futility of what we might do here in Australia and what's happening around the world. Do you think we're going to see some common sense here at any time soon?
Sadly not. You know, I really think, Peter, they've drunk this Kool-Aid. They're so greeny. You know, even these so-called liberal conservative governments have, you know, gone so far to the left. And it's very sad, but it will be interesting because, you know, you look at the Victorians, they voted for Andrews, and you almost feel like, do they need to go into the dark to get a lesson? And for the other, you know, everybody else around in every other state to see what really happens when the lights go out, including those students who will be, you know, who are planning their marches, when they can't charge up their digital devices, are they going to be as supportive? You know, it's very, very sad. It's almost like I feel we need to take a class action against not just Liberal governments, but Labor governments who have led us down into this incredible... It's a tragedy and it's a nightmare of their own making. And, you know, we are, as a country, under a great threat because of this. Economically, it's a really sad time. And we're going to look back in years to come and think, what the hell were they thinking?
Well, Darren Barnett, you're a long-time Labor staffer. You've helped out on some election campaigns for key independents like Karen Phelps and others. Maybe we should just quarantine green power and its added cost to electorates that vote Labor or vote Green. And if you are in a coalition seat that supports coal, Darren Barnett, maybe we just... You know, you can have good cheap power in those states and everyone else has to pay for their insanity.
More wind farms in Warringah, as many like to say. Look, to me, the biggest tragedy that we've seen is the functionality of the gas market that, you know, ever since...
Yeah, I agree here.
Maybe
I agree.
Sort of 12, 15 years ago, whenever the Esso Longford gas explosion was, I lived in Melbourne at the time, and the entire city went for more than a week without gas. Yeah, and people were queuing up. I remember where I worked had electric hot water, so everyone was showering at work in the morning because most people relied on gas. And at that time, out of Bass Strait, basically they were giving away that excess gas for free because the companies, Esso and others, were making their money out of oil production. But the introduction of those LNG trains up at Curtis Island has sucked out all of the excess gas from the domestic market on the East Coast. Prices have tripled, and we see the shortfall in some of those sort of slightly more variable forms of energy. They should be filled by gas, and really we've allowed that market to distort to the point where we're stuck. And I agree with what David said. We may well see some people in Adelaide and Melbourne over the summer go without power on peak days, and that will politically be a very challenging time for Daniel Andrews, but it also will reflect on the federal government. People won't cop the blame game. They'll just say, what are you people doing?